Hey everyone, welcome back to Engelbard Gaming. It's been a while and I wanted to do another nice positive video, so welcome to another episode of How About That, where I play through a game and provide commentary on what makes it stand out so much. Today I'll be playing through the awesome vertical shooter, or shmup, for the Genesis/Megadrive known as MUSHA. You might think MUSHA was just a fantastic standalone shooter for the system, and if you think that, well, you're wrong! MUSHA is part of the Aleste series, and the Japanese original, released in December of 1990, was known as MUSHA Aleste, Full Metal Fighter Eleanor. Rolls right off the tongue, doesn't it? It was developed by the awesome folks at Compile, and in Japan it was published by Toaplan. The game came to the US simply titled MUSHA in February of 1991 and was published by Seismic. Seismic turned MUSHA into an acronym standing for Metallic Uniframe Super Hybrid Armor. Anyway, the game is also on a paltry 4 megabit cartridge. It's 512 kilobytes. The US version of this game is also famously pretty rare, with official complete inbox copies selling for $850 as I record this at the end of December 2025. Cartridge-only versions usually range from between $200 and $600 depending on the condition. So why exactly was this game so rare? Well, apparently it was not a huge success when it first launched, although thankfully I did have it when it was brand new and still have it today. Now that you know the background, let's get on with it. Notice how the game kicks into its high energy music before we even see a thing. Alright, and as we begin, we jump straight into the action, and we see our fellow squad mates who were in that cutscene at the beginning get utterly destroyed. And we are completely by ourselves with a little pea shooter. So, we shoot little bullets that look like kunai or spears or something, and you'll see there is a very distinctive Japanese flair to this game. For feudal Japan for the look of a lot of the things, even though it's very robotic and mechanized in nature. So you saw me pause the game for a second there. Why did I do that? That wasn't a mistake. That's how you adjust your speed. You pause the game and use left and right, and the arrows at the top and the center of the screen represent your speed. Now finally you're going to see me pick up that lightning thing in a second here. That is our secondary gun. So let's talk about how weapons work in this game. So you have your main fire, which is the kunai that I talked about a moment ago. You'll have secondary fire when you pick up your first icon here, first of the colored orbs. And this one that I'm going to not pick up right now gives you missiles. And you have one button that fires your main shot, and it's auto fire. And you'll have another button that fires your secondary shot. The third button controls those little satellite gunship things that float next to you. So you have a few different formations for them. You can see right now I have them set to forward, which means they shoot straight up. I just changed them to three-way, so now they shoot on an angle to give us a bit of a spread. And those satellites, if you look at the top of the screen then, a little bit more to the right, you'll see there's a little gun satellite looking thing with the number ×4 next to it. I have 4 of those in reserve right now. And how do you get them in reserve? Well, as I shoot these power-up capsules, like these ones you just see me pick up now, those add to your satellites as you pick up more and more of them. And they also increase the power of your main gun. So you can see I started out with just a single little pea shooter, and now for my main gun, I'm firing 3 projectiles at a time. And the firing rate is also higher than it was. So those are things that'll increase as you pick up those little power symbols. Now the blue one here, I'm going to get in a little bit, I'm not going to get it yet. That is a shield. And each of these power-ups have multiple levels. You can see I'm on level 2 right now for the lightning gun that I've got here. And I don't know its proper name, maybe it's a laser, who knows. But anyway, it's pretty good. It's your strongest offensive weapon, and it's the best if you really want to take enemies out fast. But in later parts of the game, that's going to be less of a priority, which is why you're going to see me switch weapons at the end of the first stage here, and try and keep the weapon that I switched to for most of the game afterwards. So the 3 weapons, and I'll describe them how they work, your sub-weapons. The lightning, as you get more and more, it gets bigger and bigger, and then you get a double shot, and then it gets spread. So when we see arm level 4, that's going to be when it's powered up all the way. It'll have a really wide twin beam. For the missiles that you get, they have a trail that goes forward from levels 0 up through 3, and then level 4, the center missiles you fire out, because you fire out a bunch at a time, will open little black holes that suck smaller enemies in, and it's actually more of a hindrance than a help, because those enemies can be pulled towards you and kill you as they get stuck towards where the black hole is. So I try to avoid that power up. It's really never worth powering that one up all the way, in my opinion. And then finally we have a shield. It starts out as a simple small shield that rotates around you, and then it gets bigger, then you get a twin bigger one, and eventually The highest level of the shield is the small shield rotating around you again, but you can also fire very slow projectiles that go through everything. And you'll see that fully upgraded shield in just a moment here, so keep an eye on it, watch the little projectiles that start flying out of it. That's a pretty powerful attack, actually, partially because of its speed, and you'll see that there are plenty of times throughout this game that I'm going to finish things off with those little shield projectiles. Now, the one thing you'll have noticed already is the first level of this game is way too long, and I think it's the one flaw. This one really should have been split up into 2 levels. But other than that, I mean, this game is fantastic. I can't say it enough. You're going to see really cool stuff as we go throughout here. Level 1, I guess, is longer because they really want you to be able to collect enough power-ups to stay powered up for the rest of the game. If you can stay powered up, this game is actually relatively easy from start to finish. If you lose those power-ups, the game gets very difficult. And my shield, arm level 4 is the max. As you pick it up, it's not going to do anything new, but it will replenish the shield each time you get one of those. So you're going to see me sometimes make some mad dashes to get to those. If you're wondering why, it's because I want to make sure I don't lose the shield. And I guess that's the one thing that I haven't explained about the power-up system here yet. If you take a hit, you lose whatever secondary power-up you've currently got equipped. It just goes away, and you're left with only sort of the kunai shots that you have throughout the game. When you pick up a power-up again after that, it's going to be at arm level 3 instead of arm level 4, but you haven't died, so it's protected you as a one-hit shield, essentially. So finally, here is our first boss of MUSHA. Again, it's another giant sort of Japanese-style medieval castle. So at the top of it is a little demon head, and he's going to shoot a bunch of things out, and it's going to be pretty easy to take down, especially, with the level of powered up that we are here. So while I'm doing this, let me tell you, MUSHA is part of a long-running series, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, called Aleste. The first game appeared in the US on the Sega Master System as Power Strike and wasn't sold in stores. You had to send away to Sega to order it. And that game was really good and it's super intense. One of the most intense 8-bit overhead shooters you'll ever see on any platform. I strongly recommend checking it out. That's one where you lose your power-ups, you're completely finished. In MUSHA, it's hard if you lose your power-ups, but it's possible to recover. But anyway, there's the end of Stage 1. Stage 2, we're going to head inside, and that thing must be a lot bigger than it looked, because we're going to be in here for a while. This stage is not quite as long as the first stage. That first stage, was pushing like 6.5 minutes, so it's really long. And another thing I haven't pointed out yet is the music in this game is fantastic. Wait until you hear some of the songs later on, if you've never played this before. Stages 3 and 4 in particular have some of the awesomest Genesis music you're going to ever hear. And it's very, very much speed metal is how they describe it, and it might not sound exactly like what you're used to of speed metal like in real life, but it's pretty close. They have great sounding guitars, there's lots of echo and sort of false reverb in it to give you the impression that the sound is full. There's lots of instances where they use stereo effects on it. Just overall, everything is really impressive here. And this is a place right now where you're going to see MUSHA strays from a lot of other vertical shooters, in that you've got, things on the sides that actually are scenery that will damage you if you crash into it. A lot of overhead shooters, the scenery is just plain old wallpaper that you're flying over. And you can see, as far as visuals go, this is one of the best looking overhead shooters in the entire 16-bit era. It's got lots of parallax in it. You're going to see some pretty impressive effects and things going later on as we make our way to the next few levels here. Levels 3 and 4 especially stand out, and the final level, which is level 7, looks really good also. But anyway, let me go on a little bit more about the Aleste series in general for those of you who have never played it. So, aside from having the original game on the Master System, it also appeared on the MSX computer. We saw various sequels and a side game on the MSX. And then we saw lots of Aleste/Power Strike games for the Game Gear. There were 2 that were out during the system's normal commercial lifetime, and there is a third one for the Game Gear that came out when there was a package put together by M2 of a bunch of the classic series. But the third Game Gear game that they included was made by them, and it's brand new. So if you didn't see that when it came out a few years ago, that's one you may want to go hunting down. I don't think it released in America. I'll double check and I'll add something to the video here if it did. But you can come by that game pretty easily, and I will say that if you absolutely can't find the game to play in your real modern system, well, what I can tell you is there are alternate ways to play that on basically any hardware, and you can probably imagine what I'm talking about, and that's all I'm going to say about that. And we are approaching the end of the second stage here. And what's kind of funny about MUSHA is reviews were kind of all over the map when it came out. There were some very high reviews and some middling reviews. There were even a couple of lower ones that I remember seeing. But for the most part, like EGM, who was kind of the authority at the time, right? They thought that MUSHA was pretty good, and they scored it pretty high and talked about it being essentially, intensity-wise, the vertical equivalent of a game like Thunder Force 3. And they're pretty right on that. I mean, Thunder Force 3 on Mania is sort of equivalent to MUSHA on regular, normal difficulty. So if you play this game on harder, you'll see it's quite a bit different. But we won't go into that too much. So MUSHA, despite all this, I've got to tell you, is by far my favorite overhead shooter for any system. You know, especially if we're talking about the early eras. But I don't think I like anything that came along even in the 32-bit era or beyond better than this. And you can see I lost during the prior boss fight there, my weapon. So, told you I got busted down to level 3, so now my shield's on level 3. Here I am, I'm going to pick it up to power it up again, and there we are back to arm level 4. And watch what happens after we take out this sort of little mini-boss style guy here. Watch those tiles on the ground. Keep in mind that this is an early, paltry 512 kilobyte Genesis game. So he slowly walks off the scene to the top of the area there, and look at this. I mean, it's not real scaling, obviously, but that's an awesome effect. And watch, as we start scrolling now, yeah, we've got full, layers here, raster layers of all this stuff, along with a normal layer on top. So there's a lot of stuff going on here. It's about 10 layers deep. And what you're going to see on this level especially, lots of interactivity with the background, something sorely missing from so many overhead shooters. You crash into any of those parts that are sticking out, you'll die. If your gun satellites smash into them, they'll get destroyed and have to be replaced by another one. And we're going to see a speed zone coming up here soon. But I love these little touches. Watch all these enemies, those little frog things. They jump from the chasm down below up towards you. And when you destroy a bunch of different types of ships, they sink down to that lava river at the bottom. So it is just amazing all these little touches that they put into this game. If they had a larger cartridge size, I mean, can you imagine what this would have looked like? And while I haven't covered much more of the series itself yet at this point, I will go on just a tiny bit more about it. So there was a follow-up on Sega 16-bit hardware, but it was for the Sega CD/Mega CD, and that was Aleste. Aleste? It's not nearly as good. A lot of the people who were at Compile when this game was made were no longer there by the time that game was made. There was also a follow-up released, semi-follow-up I would say, released for the PC Engine Super CD called Spriggan. It looks a lot like MUSHA, but it doesn't really play all that much like it, and the power-up system in Spriggan is kind of weird. Now, I like Spriggan. It's still good. If you watched my top 11 PC Engine/PC Engine CD video, it made the list. But it's just not on the same level as MUSHA, in my opinion. And what makes the power-up system a little bit weird in Spriggan is the fact that you don't always have primary fire. You don't always have those kunai-looking things that you have in MUSHA. Sometimes you only have what's considered secondary fire in this game because of the way the combinations work. So that's the one thing I think that holds it back and makes the experience a little less fun than the MUSHA experience. Now, Compile contributed to or made a lot of other shooters, and they had a follow-up to the Aleste series called Space Megaforce here in the US. A lot of people love that game, but I gotta tell you, I am absolutely not one of them. Space Megaforce, feel free to pillory me in the comments if it's one of your favorites, but it's very slow. I don't really like the power-up system. It doesn't feel like an Aleste game. It feels more like one of the Soldier series games, like, Super Star Soldier, Final Soldier, those things, Soldier Blade. And again, there's a big reason for that. Compile had a hand in some of those things. But it feels very much like it's not part of the Aleste series when it comes to gameplay style, and just the way things work. And the soundtrack in that game is really weird. It is just not good. So, as far as I'm concerned, this game stands alone for 16-bit and beyond Aleste as the best example, of the series. It just has an intensity level that is unmatched by any of the other games in the series, as well as most other overhead shooters in general. Alright, so there's Stage 3, that's most people's favorite. Stage 4 is really good also, though. Stage 4 is not going to have the same level of background interactivity, but it does have a lot going on. Now, one thing I've got to tell you here is a lot of these enemies from this point on, sort of these regular enemies, are very much damage sponges. So if you don't have a fully powered up like main gun, it's going to be next to impossible to actually kill these things and take them out. You're mainly going to try and survive until you can get some more power-ups and avoid most of what they do. And you can see we're going to have the illusion of many layers here again as we go through this cloud coverage. And I will also warn you, there's going to be some really cool lightning effects, but anyone who is sensitive to flashing lights and stuff, you might want to skip ahead to the next level. It'll be outside the cloud area. You won't see clouds anymore, so it'll be easy to find in the video. There I am, picking up my blue power-up to increase those shields once again. And you can see I've got 33 now of those replacement gun satellites, should the worst occur and I lose a whole bunch of them. But here comes the flashing stuff. Everything gets dark, so we've got a storm coming. And there's our first lightning flashes. And I love that you can see the shadows of the enemies in the clouds before they emerge. That's a really cool touch. And I like that we see them all blacked out and shadowed out until, they get it to the appropriate height for us to take them out. These are all really great effects and super impressive considering the cartridge size we were dealing with here. So Compile went out of business due to financial troubles way back in 2003. Former developers went and basically joined or formed a whole bunch of other companies, and some of the Compile-owned IP went to various other companies. So for example, Sega owns Puyo Puyo, whereas M2 owns the Aleste series at this point. And yes, this is the same Compile that made Puyo Puyo, which should be no surprise since it's about the most intense falling block puzzle game ever made. And if there was one thing that Compile proved back in the day, it's they knew how to develop games that were super intense no matter what genre they were in. And frankly, I think there's a big Compile-shaped hole in the shoot-'em-up genre of today. And aside from all these shooters, they did have, a few dungeon-crawling RPGs that they dipped their toes in the water with the Puyo series. They even have a dance game called Puyo Puyo Da that's available on the Dreamcast. And it's a fun little game. It's a little simple, but it's still fun to play. Now you can see as we're clearing this part, it looks like we're even higher up. That cityscape looks like it's much lower than it was when we started the level. And I'd say this stage is a touch on the long side also. And I will let you know, in the interest of full disclosure, I had one death in this game that I edited out. And I just used a save state just in case, so I went back to it, and it was in this level. It's not because it was particularly hard, it's because I was messing around when I was trying something I shouldn't have been trying. I didn't do that again, and I didn't take another death for the whole rest of the game. I can usually beat this game without dying. But I just wanted to make sure that nobody thought I was trying to claim anything I didn't here. There is a death and I edited it out, mainly so we can just keep the video going here. And recovery from this point on is very tough, I will tell you that. So this is one of those games where if you die in the middle, it's not impossible to recover, but it is very difficult. Because you got to live long enough to get a lot of power-ups. A lot of the power capsules. And that is much easier said than done. Because these enemies, like I mentioned, complete damage sponges from this point on. Now there are plenty of times that I have been able to recover when dying this late in the game. But there's also plenty of times where it becomes almost impossible. It just kind of depends where you are and what you're doing. And as you can see, this game doesn't send down a lot of power-ups and stuff during boss fights. So you might see one of your sub-weapons pop up, or a power-up capsule thing come by. But it's not like, a lot of other games where you'll, get resupplied during these fights, including other games in the Aleste series where you get resupplied during boss fights. Alright, so there we go. That is the end of Stage 4. And we're about 20 minutes in here, so this is already longer than a lot of other complete games, and we are just slightly past the halfway point. Now, I don't know what happened here, but from this point on, until we get to the last level, the rest of these backgrounds that we see are going to be very plain. I mean, this one looks almost like something that you would expect to see just on the regular old Master System. It's not very detailed. There's not a lot of color. It doesn't jive well with what we saw in the other stages. There is going to be a little bit more to it in a moment, but I guess what I'm trying to say here is it doesn't really rise to the heights of what we've become accustomed to earlier in the game. Just cutting through, these enemies. The plain little enemies there are not so bad if you lose your power-ups. But it's, especially these bosses and stuff, these mini-bosses are pretty tough. But this one is really cool. You can see I made a dumb mistake there because I thought I could outrun it when I couldn't. I don't make that mistake again. So I lost my shield. But don't worry, everything's going to be alright. Losing your shield is not the end of the world, because the enemies are pretty pattern-based. So as long as you are, observant and confident in what you're doing, and you have enough experience with this game, you can survive most of it, if not all of it, without even having a shield. Alright, here's where we get to the second half of the level, and things get a little more complicated. So now we've got some floating castles with lots of gun platforms and emplacements to take out. Here is the missiles at level 3. So they're pretty good at this level. These are useful. If they would have stayed at this level of functionality and just gotten slightly better, at ARM level 4, this might even be the go-to weapon in the game. But the thing is, they don't stay like that. Like I said, that level 4 missile is worse than the level 3 one by far because of the behavior of the missile at level 4 when it opens up the black holes and things get sucked in from anywhere on the screen towards wherever the black hole is, and they can crash into you and kill you. Not fun. So at ARM level 3, you can see that there's a much bigger version of the shield circling my ship. I have the twin large version of the shield. Now, it might seem like this is the best shield since it's the biggest and it's a twin shield, but still, not having the projectile that you get with the ARM level 4 version of the shield really reduces its utility. You really need those extra shots that you can fire out with it, because it seems like they're not doing a whole lot maybe while you're playing the game, but they can destroy a lot of enemy projectiles and also do quite a bit of damage to bosses and things like that. And because they're slow, they're going up and progressing towards the enemy when you're not even directly in front of them anymore. So very, very helpful. And you can see we do have a little bit of slowdown here in this game at this point. So there's not a lot. This might be the only stage where we actually see any. I'm going to have to keep my eyes open and see if any more shows up at later parts. But that's probably the only slowdown in the entire game. Just a couple of parts in this stage right here. As far as the music from this point on goes, it's still alright. I think we lose just a little bit of the intensity and awesomeness from stages 3 and 4, but it stays good throughout. I mean, definitely, this is one of the best soundtracks that exist on the Genesis. And who knows, maybe I'll do a video on the best chiptune soundtracks available for the system at some point. And here is a boss that we're going to see a few times, even though there's not that much of the game left. And it's essentially the enemy's version of you with their little satellite guns. And he wasn't the full boss. Nope, we've got this little face ship again. This first part of the fight is exactly the same as the fight we did earlier on this level. And if you didn't notice, because there's no platforms and stuff above the ground now, they added this lava parallax layer on the bottom. And this boss is not really tough at all. You just do have to be aware when you switch his attack types, because you can't take out every projectile that he fires in the same way. Some you can just shoot down, some will get dissolved by the shield projectiles, and others just go through everything. There we go. That is the end of stage 5. We've got 2 more to go. We've got roughly 10 minutes left in this game. Alright, here we go into stage 6. Catch their battleship. And a lot of these enemies take a lot of hits to destroy. Again, damage sponges. If you lose a life from here on out, this is where it's almost as if it's a point of no return. Again, I won't label it impossible, because if you can dodge well enough, you can survive long enough to get more power-ups, and then the more of those you get, the easier it'll be to take enemies down. But the trick is, can you dodge and survive long enough? You can see there I did take another hit and lost my shield again, so we're back down to arm level 3. You can see my supply of those little satellite guns is plentiful at the moment, with 53 of them. And there I am losing my shield again, so I've just picked up a regular laser here, the lightning gun thing. And it's still worth having any power up if you don't have any at all, because you'll get an extra hit just from having the power up. There I am, carefully avoiding the missile power up that I absolutely do not want. So if you ever are at this point in the game and you have this and you want the shield, and you have the laser weapon here, you got to make a decision. Do I try and hang on to that, or do I switch over to the shield now and hope I survive long enough to get a second shield power up to get the arm level up? Or do I wait and get the arm level up with the laser, the lightning beam there, and switch back to the shield? So you'll have choices to make in this game, and they're going to primarily, be based on your situation and your playstyle. So this 6th stage is MUSHA's version, sort of like a big ship from R-Type, just fighting this ship and taking out its various placements and compartments and, platforms and other weapons. Most of the level consists of that. So there's a lot of different parts of the ship to take out here. It's not as detailed as the stuff in R-Type, since you don't have to destroy the ship at the end to finish the level. And I will mention there is a sort of funny R-Type connection with Compile that you maybe did or didn't know about. But Compile, the company that made this game, all the Aleste games, they developed the Sega Master System port of R-Type from back in the day. So Sega handed them that one, and they did a really good job on it. It's very impressive for the hardware that it was on. It's definitely one of the best, purely 8-bit shoot-em-ups or shmups that there is. Alright, we are done with the giant ship. And here is our second encounter with the enemy's sort of armor MUSHA style thing. You can see the attacks are a bit different this time. His first attack is just shooting all these little swirly projectiles out at you. When we knock him down to the second form here, he has sort of a whip attack where it puts them out straight, and then those little swirlies explode off of it. This is one where if you're positioned wrong, it can be easy to take a death over here, so you gotta be real careful. You want to try and be on the other side of the screen from wherever that hits. Not always possible, but what can I say? You just do your best. Alright, so that is the end of Stage 6. We are getting ready to head on to the final stage of the game. On one thing I didn't mention too much, I talked about it a little bit, but you have your speed controls where you pause it and you can use left and right to change your speed level. For the 4th level in the game, where we're going through the cavern area and all that background is deadly, if you don't bring your speed up to at least 4 or 5, you're not going to be fast enough to navigate those sections of the canyon. Now there's going to be a part in here where it's really close quarters, so you might want to lower your speed so you don't smash into the sides by accident. So we're going to have some more background interactivity here. Not a lot, but just some. So and to me, this is sort of the weirdest thing about this game. So in stages 2 and 3, we have lots of background interactivity with walls being on the sides, things you can smash into, things that can kill you. When we get beyond that, in stages 4, 5, and 6, there's none of that background interactivity at all. And then here in the final stage in stage 7, there's just a little bit and it's kind of at the end. I think if they would have added a little bit more, that would have ratcheted up the intensity level and maybe the stress of playing the game a little bit, which for this type of game is a good thing. And I think it really would have just put MUSHA on the next level. So while it is a fantastic game, and like I said, my favorite overhead shooter, I think, on any platform, there are still things I would have done, maybe to improve it a little bit. So I'll run down all of them, just collect them all here in this one spot as we're going through the level here, because there's not a lot to mention. But the first thing I would do, like I mentioned earlier, is I would take that first level, I would split it in half. I would change that into 2 levels. I'd add a brand new level in between levels 1 and 2. And then I would also probably split one of the other longer levels in half also. I don't know, maybe the cloud level, or stage 5. I think stage 5 especially feels like maybe it goes on a little too long also. Even if it's not the longest, it just feels like it, because there's not a lot happening there. And in each of those 2 stages, I would add a much higher degree of background interactivity, and I would have more of that in this final stage here also, with more stuff to go through, to avoid, and maybe just tighter spaces to navigate. We only have just a tiny little bit of that at the end, and I think the game would have been better with more of it. So I think just splitting 2 of those levels in 2, adding some of that stuff, maybe making it slightly easier to recover from a death, those things really would have elevated this game just to the next level. And I love it for what it is. I could play this game often. I've played it several times this year after not having played it in a while. But yeah, there's so much that's so good, and I think it would have been classic, an absolute, undeniable classic, if it had just a little bit more substance, and that would have been the way to get it. So here is the first phase of the boss. And for the final boss, let's call it the final boss area, there's several things we're going to go up against. So there's that one there, and here's where we're going to start getting into sort of close quarters a little bit, where we've got sides that can damage us. It is real easy to die on this part. So those little sort of flashing golden orbs that the larger orbs shoot out at you, you can't take those things out. You can't shoot them. You have to avoid them. They destroy you if they touch you even once, so you gotta be on the ball, no pun intended, in order to avoid those things. You've got to really focus and pay attention. If you let your attention slip even for a split second here, it's going to be over. That's going to be the end. So there is the second phase of the final boss taken out. And you can see now we're really in tight quarters for this last phase. And on this one, if the balls hit the side of the wall, they grow into that little arm-looking thing that sticks out and destroys you if you touch it. So the trick here is you've got to stay close enough that you can avoid the highest arms, but you've got to also be wary that you don't get smashed by one of the balls as it's coming out before it hits the sides. Alright, so there's the third phase of the boss, and now we're going to zoom on out of here. And you think, alright, well done, we've just beat MUSHA, hooray, that's the end. But not so fast. We've got a tiny little bit more left. So it looked like that was the end, but we're not finished yet. Can you guess who's going to show up for a final encore appearance here? Yep, it is this guy that we have been slowly but steadily destroying piece by piece over the course of the last few levels. We get to finish the job now. So there we go. We have taken him out, and now that really is the end. So that is the complete game of MUSHA. And like so much of the rest of the music in this game, the ending music that we're going to hear over the credits is just really awesome metal song. So I'll let it play through here. I'm not going to have a lot to say about it afterwards, so I'll put my closing comments at the end, and I'll time it so that they end with the ending credits of the game. So here we get a look at this nice huge satellite that's really well designed and awesome looking. Yeah, just in the end, MUSHA, so good. I can't recommend enough. If you're a shooter or shoot 'em up fan or shmup fan that has managed to avoid this game for all these years, give it a try. You might think at first it seems all slow and easy, but if you stick with it, there is challenge, especially the first few times you play it as you're getting used to it. And then you can always up the difficulty if you feel like it gets too easy. But it's just so good. I mean, there's no shooter fan should go through life without having played MUSHA several times. And I'd say it's probably my second favorite shooter on the system, immediately behind Thunder Force 3. Yes, Thunder Force 4/Lightning Force, if you've seen some of my other videos, you will know that is not my favorite shooter on the series. I don't think it's as good as 3. It looks better, it sounds great, it plays pretty well, but I don't like the weapons as much as 3, and all that slowdown isn't as good. It makes it worse to play, a worse experience, and then also the level design itself just is not as interesting as the levels in 3. Now, I still like it, it's still a great game, and I'd say it's probably the third best shoot 'em up on the system, behind Thunder Force 3 and MUSHA. And another video I'm going to do pretty soon is going to show you a shoot 'em up that made the rounds on all the systems that were out at the time. You might be able to guess what it is. It's the game that I punished myself with for making a mistake on a fact in a prior video. So I spent a lot of time recording 2 versions of it already, but I don't want to just show 2 versions of that game. I want to show all the versions of that game. So that's something that I will put out in the new year here. If you're worried about what video to expect next and what's coming next week before we hit New Year's, it's going to be the last episode of the Shining Force retrospective, in which I look at the Game Boy Advance remake of the first Shining Force called Shining Force Resurrection of Dark Dragon. And you can see we've got a little bit more of the ending. And I gotta say, one of the most disappointing games I probably ever played that was not terrible but just did not live up to the original has got to be Aleste on the Sega CD. After I had played this game, I expected an awesome heavy metal soundtrack. I expected the same type of play mechanics and gameplay we saw here, but that everything would be just boosted up and be a sort of mid-generation improved experience where maybe we'd see a lot of scaling and some of the other effects that the Sega CD was capable of. And while they put in a little bit of fanciness to it, for the most part, that game doesn't look nearly as good as this one. I mean, there's not as much parallax in it. The music is not even 1/10 as good as the soundtrack in this game. It uses Red Book audio, but it is all very, I don't know, it's more techno-y. It's not a heavy metal soundtrack. It's not speed metal like this game here. All right, so that will do it. We'll finish things up right now. All right, anyway, your turn, folks. Have you played MUSHA before? What do you think of it? Where does it stand in the pantheon of the Aleste series and shooters in general for you? tell me all about it in the comments. And that'll do it for this video, my retro gaming friends. If you enjoyed it, please like it and share it online somewhere. If you haven't yet, please subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you won't miss any of my videos. You can support the work that I do here on Patreon, Ko-fi, and right here on YouTube through things like super thanks and channel memberships. With that, I'll say thanks for watching and see me later.